The sky above Meridian 7 turned orange on the day they came. Sarah was feeding her chickens when she saw the first ships break through the clouds. They were black and sharp, like knives cutting through paper. She had never seen anything like them before. Her father ran out of the farmhouse, his face white with fear. He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the cellar. All around them, other farmers were doing the same thing, running, hiding, praying. There were species that ruled over 40 star systems. They had 6 legs, hard shells the color of dried blood, and compound eyes that showed no emotion. To them, humans were pests, vermin that had settled on a world the Dominion wanted for themselves. Meridian 7 was a farming colony with no army, no weapons, and no way to fight back. It was not a battle, it was an extermination. The bombardment lasted for 3 days. Cities burned. Farms became craters. The colonial government sent out distress signals, but help was too far away. The nearest human fleet was 6 weeks out. By then, there would be nothing left to save. In the northern highlands, far from the main population centers, the small community of settlement watched the distant fires with horror. There were 53 people living on the edge of civilization. Farmers, teachers, a doctor, and their families. They had no way to escape and nowhere to run. On the 4th day, something unexpected happened. Young Thomas was checking his family's water tanks when he heard the explosion. It came from the mountains to the east, followed by a trail of smoke cutting across the sky. Something had crashed, something big. He ran to tell his father David, who gathered the other men of the settlement. They took their trucks and drove toward the crash site, not knowing what they would find. Part of them hoped it was a human rescue ship. Part of them feared what it actually was. The battle cruiser had broken apart on impact. Its hull was scattered across half a kilometer of rocky ground. Fires burned in the wreckage, and the smell of strange chemicals filled the air. David stopped his truck and stared at the destruction. Then he heard the sounds, clicking, chittering, the sounds of wounded creatures in pain. They found 43 alive in the wreckage. Most were badly hurt. Their shells were cracked, their limbs broken. They lay in the dirt, too weak to move, their compound eyes watching the humans approach. Was the first to reach them. He was 62 years old, a farmer who had spent his whole life growing food and raising animals. He had never held a weapon. He had never wanted to. He looked at the wounded aliens. He looked south, where the smoke of burning cities still rose into the sky. He thought about the millions of people dying right now because of creatures just like these. Then he knelt beside the nearest and checked its wounds. "What are you doing?" David asked, his voice sharp with anger. "They're hurt," said simply. "They're killing us. Right now, their ships are murdering our people." Looked up at his neighbor. His eyes were tired and sad, but his voice was steady. "I know what they're doing. I know what they are. But I also know what I am. I'm a man who helps injured creatures. That's who I've always been. I won't let them change that." The argument lasted an hour. Some wanted to leave to die. Others wanted to kill them outright. A few stood with and said nothing. In the end, it was who settled it. She was the settlement's only doctor, a woman who had treated broken bones and difficult births for 20 years. She walked past the arguing men, opened her medical bag, and started treating the nearest alien. "I took an oath," she said without looking up. "I don't remember it saying anything about species." One by one, the others joined her. Not all of them. Some refused and went back to the settlement, but most stayed. They splinted broken limbs. They cleaned wounds. They carried the injured to the trucks and drove them back too. Commander Rand woke up 3 days later in a human barn. She was lying on a bed of straw, her wounds wrapped in clean bandages. A human child was sitting nearby, watching her with curious eyes. She tried to move, but pain shot through her body. The child ran away, and a moment later, an old human male entered the barn. He carried a cup of water and a bowl of something that smelled like grain. "You're awake," he said. "Good, you need to eat." Rand stared at him. She was a commander of the Dominion fleet. She had ordered the deaths of thousands, and this creature was offering her food. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was rough, her translator barely functioning. The human sat down beside her. "Because you're hungry," he said, "and because I have food. It's not complicated. We are destroying your world." "Yes." "Your people are dying." "Yes." "And you help me." Was quiet for a long moment. He looked out the barn door at the smoke still rising in the southern sky. When he spoke, his voice was soft. "My wife died 6 years ago, cancer. There was nothing anyone could do." He turned back to look at the alien commander. "In her last days, she told me something I never forgot. She said that the universe is cold and dark, and the only warmth in it is what we choose to create. She said that cruelty is easy, but kindness is a choice, and that choice is what makes us human." He held out the cup of water. "I can't stop your ships. I can't save my world. But I can choose who I want to be in the time I have left. And I choose to be someone who gives water to the thirsty, even if they don't deserve it." Rand took the water, she drank, she said nothing. For 11 days, the humans of settlement cared for 43 soldiers. 5 died despite their efforts and were buried with markers bearing their names. When Dominion rescue ships finally arrived, the survivors were healthy, fed, and unharmed. Commander Rand was the last to leave. She stood at the edge of the settlement, looking at the humans who had saved her. Stood among them, his face tired but calm. She wanted to say something, to thank him, to apologize, to explain that she would report this, that she would tell her superiors what these humans had done. But she said nothing. She boarded the rescue ship and flew away. 3 days later, the genocide of Meridian 7 was complete. 2.3 million humans dead. They erased the colony from their star charts and forbade humanity from that sector of space. Commander Rand filed no report about her rescue. She told no one about the farmers who had shown her mercy. She buried the memory deep inside herself and tried to forget. But memories have a way of surviving, and some debts can never be erased, no matter how much time passes. The people of settlement died with their world. Their names were recorded in the colonial database, recovered years later from an orbiting satellite. 50 humans who chose compassion over hatred, mercy over revenge. The galaxy moved on. They believed the matter was closed. They did not understand humans at all. 150 years is a long time. Stars are born and die in less. Empires rise and fall. Species evolve and change. But some things remain constant, buried deep in the heart of civilizations like seeds waiting for rain. The Terran Confederation had grown beyond anything the early colonists could have imagined. 200 worlds now flew the blue and green flag of Earth. Human ships traveled trade routes across half the galaxy. Human engineers built stations that orbited distant suns. Human diplomats sat in the great halls of the Galactic Concord, speaking for a species that had once been dismissed as primitive and weak. Ambassador stood at the window of her ship, the diplomatic vessel Remembrance, watching the stars drift past. She was 54 years old, with streaks in her black hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of too many negotiations and not enough sleep. She had spent her career building bridges between species, finding common ground where none seemed to exist. Today, she faced her greatest challenge yet. The message from the Galactic Concord had arrived 3 days ago. The Dominion, once the terror of the outer sectors, had been brought to its knees. Their enemy was the crystalline hegemony, a collective of silicon-based beings who expanded through absolute annihilation. The hegemony did not negotiate. They did not accept surrender. They simply erased whatever stood in their path. The Dominion had fought them for 30 years and lost. Their fleets were broken. Their colonies were glass craters. There was under siege, its population starving, its defenses failing. In desperation, they had done something no one ever expected. They had asked for help. The galactic conquered was divided. Some species wanted to intervene. Others argued that they had earned their fate through centuries of conquest and cruelty. The debate had raged for weeks with no resolution. Then someone had suggested asking the humans. Understood why. Humanity had a reputation in the conquered. They were known as the soft species, the ones who preferred talking to fighting, who built hospitals before military bases, who had never started a war of aggression in their history among the stars. If anyone would advocate for mercy, it would be the humans. What the conquered did not understand was that human mercy was not simple. It was not weakness disguised as virtue. It was something far more complex, far more dangerous. Her assistant, a young man named Robert, entered the observation room. "Ambassador, we've received the full petition, and there's something else." He handed her a data pad. On it was a single file, flagged with the highest priority marker the Confederation used. The seal of the Memorial Archives glowed on the screen. His heart grew cold. The Memorial Archives were humanity's most sacred institution. They contained the name of every human who had died in space, every colony lost, every ship destroyed. But they contained something else too. Records of every interaction between humans and other species, every kindness shown, every cruelty inflicted, every debt unpaid. Humans remembered, not vaguely, not as historical footnote, but specifically. Names, dates, places, who did what to whom and what was owed in return. Opened the file. It was labeled Meridian 7. She read for an hour. She read about a farming colony destroyed without warning. She read about 2.3 million deaths. She read about a crashed battlecruiser and 50 farmers who made an impossible choice. She read the name of the commander those farmers had saved. Ran, now Supreme Matriarch Ran, the leader of the dying Dominion, the one who had come to beg for help. Set down the data pad. Her hands were trembling, though whether from rage or something else she could not say. "Robert," she said quietly, "send a message to the conquered. Tell them humanity will handle the petition personally." The young man hesitated. "Ambassador, are you sure? The Dominion, what they did to Meridian 7. "I know what they did." His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "I also know what our people did in return. Both debts must be answered." She turned back to the window. Somewhere out there, a species that had tried to exterminate humanity was dying. Their leader was the same being who had received mercy from farmers she had come to slaughter, and had repaid that mercy with silence and genocide. 150 years. They had probably forgotten Meridian 7 entirely, a minor operation, a footnote in their history of conquest. Why would they remember the names of vermin they had exterminated? But humans remembered. They remembered everything. The remembrance changed course, heading for the Galactic Conquered Assembly Station. Began preparing her statement, choosing each word with the precision of a surgeon choosing her instruments. She thought about a farmer who gave water to his enemy. She thought about a doctor who treated wounds regardless of species. She thought about 50 people who died showing mercy to those who deserved none. Their compassion had been buried for a century and a half. Now it was time to dig it up. The wanted help. They would receive it, but not the way they expected, not the simple charity they assumed humans would offer. No, they would receive something far more profound. They would receive justice, the kind of justice that only humans could deliver, the kind that remembered every wound and every kindness, every death and every act of grace, the kind that could shake the stars. Smiled as she worked on her speech. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone about to teach the galaxy a lesson it would never forget. Humans were not the soft species the conquered believed them to be. They were something far more dangerous. They were the species that remembered, the species that kept accounts across centuries, the species that would save your life and then make you earn it for the rest of your existence. that had sown their seeds 150 years ago. They had planted cruelty and mercy in the same soil, never imagining that both would grow. Now it was time for the harvest. Ambassador finished her preparations and sent a single message to Earth. It contained only 2 words, but everyone who received it understood exactly what they meant. We remember. Across 200 worlds, humans read those words and nodded. They knew what was coming. They had been waiting for this moment their entire lives, even those who had never heard of Meridian 7. Because every human child learned the same lesson. Kindness given is kindness remembered. Cruelty inflicted is cruelty stored. And when the time comes for accounting, humanity pays every debt in full. They were about to learn what that meant. The Assembly Hall of the Galactic Concord was the largest structure ever built by intelligent beings. It floated in the void between stars, a sphere of crystal and metal that could hold representatives from every known species. Today, it was full. Word had spread that something historic was about to happen. Supreme Matriarch Rand stood at the central podium, surrounded by holographic displays that translated her words into 1,000 languages. She was old now, her shell faded to a dull, her movements slow and careful. But her compound eyes still held the fire of someone who had once commanded fleets and conquered worlds. The Dominion requests the aid of the Galactic Concord, she said, her voice carrying across the vast chamber. Our enemy cannot be reasoned with. They cannot be stopped by our remaining forces. Without intervention, my species will be extinct within 1 standard year. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Representatives whispered to each other, calculating the political costs of intervention. They had few friends. Their centuries of aggression had left them isolated and despised. We will accept any terms, Rand continued. Any conditions. We ask only for the chance to survive. The Speaker of the Assembly, a tall being from a species of plant-like diplomats, raised one of its limbs. The Concord recognizes the Terran Confederation. Ambassador, you have requested to address this petition. Rose from the human delegation section. She was dressed simply in the uniform of the diplomatic corps. No medals, no decorations, just a single pin on her collar showing the blue and green of Earth. She walked to the podium and stood beside the leader. For a long moment, she said nothing, just looked out at the thousands of beings watching from their seats. The Terran Confederation will provide full, humanitarian support to the Dominion. The chamber erupted. Shouts of surprise and disbelief echoed from every direction. Even the speaker seemed stunned. Humanity, of all species, offering to save their former enemy. Rand turned to stare at the human ambassador. Her compound eyes could not show emotion the way human eyes could, but her body language betrayed her shock. Waited for the noise to die down. When she spoke again, her voice was cold and clear. However, before we proceed, there is a matter of history that must be addressed. She touched a control on the podium. A holographic display appeared above them, showing a green and brown world orbited by a single moon. 150 years ago, this was the human colony of Meridian 7. It was a farming world. 2.3 million people lived there, growing food and raising families. They had no military. They posed no threat to anyone. The image changed. Now it showed ships descending through clouds, weapons firing, cities burning. The Dominion attacked without warning. They declared humanity a pest species and began systematic extermination. The genocide lasted 6 days. When it was over, every human on Meridian 7 was dead. Silence filled the chamber. Many species had heard rumors about human colonies destroyed in the early expansion era, but few knew the details. This crime has never been acknowledged by the Dominion. No apology has been offered. No reparations have been made. To the Meridian 7 was a minor operation, a footnote in their history of conquest. Turned to face Rand directly. But we remember, Supreme Matriarch. We remember every name, every death, every child who never grew up, every family that was erased. Rand stood frozen. She had not thought about Meridian 7 in decades. It had been one operation among hundreds, a world cleared for future colonization that had never happened. And we remember something else, continued. During that genocide, a battle cruiser crashed in the Northern Highlands. 43 crew survived, including the ship's commander. They were wounded, dying, helpless. The holographic display changed again. Now it showed a small settlement, simple buildings surrounded by farmland, and a crashed ship in the mountains nearby. The humans of settlement found them. 50 farmers and their families, watching their world burn while they decided what to do with their enemies. His voice softened, but somehow became more intense. They helped them. They treated their wounds. They shared their food. For 11 days, while ships murdered millions of their people, 50 humans showed mercy to 43 of their killers. She pulled out a small data chip and placed it on the podium. The commander of that crashed ship was you, Supreme Matriarch. You were saved by a farmer named, who gave you water from his own ration while your fleet burned his world. You were healed by a doctor named, who treated your wounds while her friends and family died in the south. Rand's legs trembled. Memories she had buried for over a century flooded back. The barn, the straw bed, the old human male with tired eyes holding out a cup of water. You filed no report of your rescue, said. You told no one. You let the genocide continue and then erased Meridian 7 from your charts as if it had never existed. You repaid mercy with silence. The chamber was absolutely still. Every being present understood they were witnessing something unprecedented. Humanity remembers everything, Supreme Matriarch, the cruelty and the kindness, the 2.3 million dead and the 50 who chose compassion anyway. Picked up the data chip. These are our terms for humanitarian support. She listed them one by one. Full public acknowledgement of the Meridian 7 genocide. Reparations paid to the descendants of survivors from other human colonies. Educational programs teaching children what their ancestors did. And on the Dominion itself, a memorial bearing the names of every human who died and every human who showed mercy. You will remember what was done to us, said, and you will remember what we did in return. Both lessons will be carved into your civilization forever. Rand's voice was barely a whisper. You would save us after what we did. 50 farmers decided that wounded enemies were still people who deserved help. They died for that belief. Every single one of them was killed when Meridian 7 was finally cleansed. Eyes met Rand's compound gaze. We will not dishonor their memory by being less than they were. She stepped back from the podium. But we will also never permit their compassion to be forgotten. That is the price of human mercy, Supreme Matriarch. Not payment in resources or territory, payment in memory. You will remember what humanity is for the rest of your species' existence. And you will remember that when you were dying, when you had nothing left to offer, we came to help anyway. Returned to her seat. The chamber remained silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, Supreme Matriarch Rand picked up the data chip. She looked at it, then at the human ambassador, then at the holographic images of Meridian 7 still floating above the podium. We accept, she said quietly, all terms without condition. And so it was done. Humanity would save its oldest enemy, not out of weakness or forgetfulness, but out of something far more powerful. They would save thee and make them remember why. Because compassion given is never truly lost. It waits, sometimes for generations, until the time comes for it to be answered. The farmers of had waited 150 years. Now their mercy would reshape the galaxy. The relief convoys began arriving within weeks of the conquered assembly. Human agricultural ships entered Dominion space carrying seeds and soil processors. Medical frigates established orbital hospitals above dying worlds. Engineers worked alongside technicians to repair shattered infrastructure. It was the largest humanitarian mission in galactic history. Thousands of human volunteers left their homes to help a species that had once tried to exterminate them. They asked for nothing in return except the promise that they would remember. The crystalline hegemony watched these developments with cold interest. They were not organic beings. They did not understand concepts like mercy or compassion. To them, the universe was simple. You either expanded or you were destroyed. The weak were consumed. The strong survived. The humans were clearly weak. They wasted resources helping enemies instead of strengthening themselves. They sent unarmed ships into war zones. They risked their lives for creatures that had slaughtered millions of their kind. The hegemony decided to teach them a lesson. The first attack came without warning. A hegemony strike force intercepted a human relief convoy in the outer territories of Dominion space. 47 ships were destroyed in minutes. 312 humans died, including doctors, nurses, engineers, and farmers who had volunteered to help grow food on barren worlds. Admiral James received the news aboard the dreadnought. He was the commander of the Terran Defense Fleet, the military force that had escorted the humanitarian mission. He was also the grandson of the doctor who had treated wounded on Meridian 150 years ago. He had grown up with the story. His grandmother had died before he was born, but his family had passed down her memory like a sacred flame. The cup she had used to give water to wounded aliens. The medical bag she had carried to the crash site. The words she had spoken to explain her choice. I took an oath. I don't remember it saying anything about species. Now the hegemony had killed people following that same oath. Relief workers, volunteers, people whose only crime was trying to feed the hungry and heal the sick. James stood on the bridge of his ship, looking at the tactical display. The hegemony fleet was massing at the edge of Dominion space. They outnumbered the Terran Defense Fleet 3-1. They had better weapons, more ships, and no concept of mercy. "Admiral," his communications officer said, "we're receiving a transmission from the hegemony commander." "Put it through." The voice that filled the bridge was cold and mechanical, translated from whatever method the crystal beings used to communicate. "Human vessels, you are in violation of hegemony space. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed. Your interference in our conquest will not be tolerated." James looked at the faces of his crew, young men and women who had signed up to protect humanity and its allies. They knew the odds. They knew what they were facing. None of them looked afraid. "Hegemony Commander," James replied, his voice steady, "you have attacked humanitarian vessels under Terran protection. You have killed people who came only to help those in need. For this, there will be consequences." The crystal being's response was contemptuous. "You are outnumbered, human. Your sentiment is weakness. Your mercy is foolishness. Withdraw now and we may spare your pathetic fleet." James thought about his grandmother. He thought about the farmer whose name his ship bore. He thought about 50 people who had chosen to help their enemies while their world burned around them. "You misunderstand us," he said quietly. "We came here to save lives, even lives that once tried to end ours. We would have preferred peace. We would have negotiated. We would have found another way." He stood, his voice hardening. "But you killed our people, people who carried medicine and food, people who volunteered to help the hungry and the sick, people whose only weapon was compassion." The bridge fell silent. Every officer knew what was coming. "My grandmother died on Meridian 7 because she believed that mercy was more important than survival. She treated your enemies' wounds while they murdered her neighbors. She gave water to creatures who came to exterminate her, and she did it because she believed that kindness was what made us human." James looked at the hegemony fleet on his display. "You killed people like her. You killed the helpers, the healers, the ones who came to do good in a dark universe." His voice dropped to something cold and terrible. And now you will learn the other half of human nature, the part we don't talk about, the part that remembers every act of cruelty and stores it away until the time comes for payment. He gave the order. The Terran defense fleet began to move. The Battle of Aaron Prime lasted 9 hours. It was the bloodiest engagement in human history, and the most decisive victory any organic species had ever won against the hegemony. Human ships fought with a fury that explanation. They took damage that should have destroyed them and kept fighting. They made tactical decisions that seemed suicidal but proved devastating. They communicated with each other in ways the hegemony could not predict or counter. The crystal beings had studied human military capabilities. They had calculated odds and probabilities. They had determined that the soft, sentimental species would retreat when faced with superior force. They were wrong. Humans did not retreat. Humans advanced. They pushed into the heart of the hegemony formation, taking losses that would have broken any other fleet, and they kept coming. Because they were not fighting for territory or resources. They were fighting for something the hegemony could not understand. They were fighting for the memory of 312 people who had died trying to help. They were fighting for the principle that those who prey on mercy deserve no mercy in return. When the battle ended, the hegemony fleet was destroyed. 60% of the Terran defense fleet was gone. Admiral James had lost an arm and nearly his life. But the hegemony learned something that day. They learned that humanity was not the soft species they appeared to be. They learned that the same people who would save their enemies would destroy anyone who attacked the helpers. They learned that human mercy was not weakness. It was a choice, and those who punished that choice would face a fury that could shake the stars. The hegemony sued for peace within a month. They agreed to withdraw from all contested space. They agreed to never attack humanitarian vessels again. They agreed to remember what happened when they killed people whose only weapon was compassion. Admiral returned home to a hero's welcome, but he refused all honors. He asked only that the names of the 312 be added to the memorial archives, alongside the names of Meridian 7. "They died following my grandmother's oath," he said at the memorial service. "They died helping people who had once tried to destroy us. They died being human." He looked out at the crowd of mourners. "And because of them, a species will survive. They will live because humans chose to help them, and humans chose to fight for that help. That is what we are. That is what we will always be." He raised his remaining hand in salute. "We remember the kindness we give. We remember the cruelty we receive, and we make sure that both are repaid in full." The galaxy watched and understood. Humanity was not weak or strong, merciful or ruthless. They were both, held in perfect balance. They would save you if you needed saving. They would fight for you if you were attacked while under their protection. And they would never, ever forget. 1 year after the Battle of Aaron Prime, the memorial was complete. It rose from the central plaza of the Dominion capital, a tower of black stone that stretched toward the violet sky. Carved into its surface were 2.3 million names, each one a human who had died on Meridian 7. The letters were small, but they covered every centimeter of the monument from base to summit. At the bottom, set apart in gold, were 50 more names, the farmers of settlement, David, Sarah, Thomas, and 45 others who had chosen mercy over hatred. Beneath those names was a simple inscription. They showed us what we could not see in ourselves. The plaza was filled with beings from across the galaxy. Human diplomats stood beside civilians. Representatives from the Galactic Concord watched from elevated platforms. Journalists recorded every moment for broadcast to 1,000 worlds. Supreme Matriarch Ran walked slowly toward the podium that had been set up at the base of the monument. She was the oldest alive, her shell nearly white with age, her movements careful and deliberate. 2 attendants walked beside her, ready to catch her if she fell. She did not fall. Ambassador watched from the front row of the human delegation. Beside her sat Admiral James, his empty sleeve pinned neatly against his uniform. On his other side was a young woman named Maya, the great-great-great-granddaughter of himself. The matriarch reached the podium and turned to face the crowd. For a long moment, she said nothing, just looked at the monument behind her, at the names carved into stone. 151 years ago, she began, her voice carrying across the plaza through translation devices, I crashed on a human world. I was a commander of the Dominion fleet. I had come to help exterminate a species we considered pests. I had no doubt that we were right. She paused, gathering her strength. My ship failed. I was wounded. My crew was dying around me. We lay in the dirt of an alien world waiting for death. Her compound eyes moved across the crowd, finding the human delegation. They found us, the humans of settlement, farmers, teachers, a doctor, simple people living simple lives on the edge of the colony we were destroying. Her voice cracked, something no one had ever heard from a leader. They helped us. While our ships burned their cities, they bandaged our wounds. While their families died, they shared their food with us. While everything they loved was turned to ash, they treated us with kindness we had never earned and could never deserve. She turned to look directly at Maya. A man named sat beside me for 3 nights. He gave me water from his own cup. He told me about his wife, who had died of illness years before. He told me that kindness was a choice, and that choice was what made humans human. Tears flowed from her compound eyes. No one in the plaza had ever seen a cry before. I survived because of him. 42 of my crew survived because of those farmers. And when our rescue ships came, I said nothing. I filed no report. I let the genocide continue and told no one what those humans had done. She bowed her head. I was ashamed, not of being saved by prey, but of what their mercy revealed about me, about us. We were the monsters, they were the heroes, and I could not face that truth. She straightened and looked out at the crowd again. But humans remember. They remember everything. The cruelty we inflicted and the kindness they returned. They waited 150 years until we were the ones dying, the ones helpless. And then they came. Her voice grew stronger. They came to save us, not to conquer, not to enslave, not to take revenge. They came because 50 farmers had decided, a century and a half ago, that wounded enemies were still people who deserved help. She turned to face Ambassador. Humanity, you have taught us something we could never learn through conquest. You have taught us that mercy is not weakness, that memory is not merely grudge, that a species strong enough to save their enemies is strong enough to reshape the stars. She bowed, a gesture her species had never made to another race. The will remember. For as long as our civilization endures, we will remember Meridian 7. Not just the crime we committed, but the grace that answered it. We will remember that when we were at our worst, humans showed us what being at your best really means. She straightened and walked slowly toward Maya. The young woman stood as the ancient alien approached. You carry his blood, Rand said softly. The man who gave me water. He died because of what we did, but his kindness survived. It waited in human memory until the time came for it to matter. She reached out one withered limb and touched Maya's hand. Thank you, thank your ancestors, and know that we'll spend the rest of our existence trying to be worthy of what they gave us. Maya looked into the alien's compound eyes. She saw something there she had not expected. Not just gratitude or shame, but something deeper. Understanding, connection. The recognition that kindness given freely creates bonds that transcend species and centuries. My great-great-great-grandfather believed that the universe was cold and dark, Maya said quietly, and that the only warmth in it was what we chose to create. He chose to create warmth, even for his enemies. She smiled. We don't ask you to be grateful. We ask you to do the same for someone else. Pass it forward. That's how his kindness survives. The ceremony concluded as the sun set over the Dominion capital. The memorial cast a long shadow across the plaza, its names catching the fading light. Humans and stood together, looking up at the monument to tragedy and grace. The story spread across the galaxy in the days that followed. Every species heard about the farmers of the mercy they showed, and the retribution that followed when that mercy was tested. They heard about humans who could save their worst enemies and destroy anyone who preyed on that salvation. The Terran Confederation continued to grow. They became their closest allies, a species transformed by the weight of debt they could never fully repay. The crystalline hegemony retreated to their core worlds and never threatened organic life again. And in the memorial archives of Earth, the names of Meridian 7 were preserved forever. 2.3 million deaths, 50 acts of mercy, 150 years of waiting, and a lesson the galaxy would never forget. No compassion escapes human memory. No cruelty is ever forgotten. And those who mistake mercy for weakness learn, in fire and fury, exactly what humanity is capable of. The stars themselves had trembled at what that lesson unleashed. They would tremble again whenever anyone forgot. Because humans remember, they remember everything, and they always will.